We will hear argument this morning in case 2512.
The grievances we could go into with this system. I think we could be here for hours.
National Collegiate Athletic Association.
I think we have some proof, even a few years into NIL now, that people care about the logo.
There are too many people in power who have no desire to give up that power.
The NCAA's ever-shifting decisions, not stable decisions.
Does the concept of amateurism in college athletics even matter anymore?
They've capped it again without any sort of collective bargaining.
We'll finish with our unilateral decision. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Unilateral Decisions. We're back talking something that was mentioned 2 weeks ago as decently high likelihood. We weren't sure it had much teeth, but it's here. We're talking the executive order on college athletics. President Trump issued an executive order on April 3rd with the idea that it's an urgent national action to save college sports. So, Mike Walsh, we start off with you. Generally speaking, what is this purpose?
The purpose, I think, is to follow through on what he had promised and be able to show to his constituents and appeal to the people who are coming to him and his branch for some sort of action and to figure out, okay, what can be done? What can we put forth? What are the things that, he pulled that roundtable together. He took some of the people from the roundtable, pulled them in on a committee and talked through what does an executive order need to say and look like? How does that help? So, kind of identifying the groups of people that he felt were most important to take care of and the voices to listen to and say, this is how we can get back to, making college athletics great again. And so these are the things that we can put forth. It's really setting the table for everybody who is in that orbit and who is in Washington and who has been asking for everything to be able to say, this is what we're asking for. This is what we're going forth with. I think that it accomplished that mission to at least get everybody talking about it and having the discussion and putting something down on paper. And, Joe's been saying for a long time on these episodes about stability. I think that's the idea. I think the idea is that it creates some level of stability. Obviously, everyone knows we've talked about previously, there are going to be challenges to it, but it is a step toward creating some stability based on the feedback that the executive branch has heard.
Many of the things we've talked about on the show have involved congressional components, and that was kind of the basis of the show 2 weeks ago. With this executive action, Sam, last time we talked, you felt it really didn't have any teeth. And Sam, we're missing you here in the studio, but appreciate you joining us via phone.
No, of course, happy to do it. I stand by what I said a couple weeks ago, where there are a lot of components to this executive order that really do try to kind of thread the needle and get it to a place where it can actually be enforceable, or at least try to be enforceable. But we've really shown over the past couple of years of this administration, and really not even just this administration, but even looking back to other administrations as well, there's a pretty solid limit to what executive orders can do. They can't necessarily create new law. I mean, they create new law in the way they kind of function in some cases, but they really can't go against what's already set forth in statutory law. And that's really what a lot of this executive order tries to do. It tries to rewrite antitrust law. It tries to rewrite, a lot of what courts have already decided falls under antitrust law. And it's something where it's going to be really difficult to defend.
Well, on that note, Sam, we're looking ahead. I mean, this is, it's supposed to go into effect, August 1st. So you've got departments throughout the country, trying to make plans, and there's pieces of this executive order that, kind of fly in the face of, how people are operating right now. But you've probably also got some university presidents out there that have a pretty low risk tolerance to, testing, the loss of some grants or anything along that. If you're an athletic director right now looking ahead to 26, 27, are there pieces of this executive order that you're abiding by or heeding? And then are there pieces that, just can be ignored right out of the gate?
Yeah, that's a really important question, because unlike kind of maybe what we expected, the enforcement mechanism here is targeting the universities. It's not saying, being able to transfer more than once is illegal because the president can't do that, but it's saying schools that don't comply with the rules that the NCAA sets up regarding kind of one-time transfers could be at risk of losing grant funding, could be at risk of, having action taken against them by the Department of Education and, the various other, executive agencies and, even some independent regulatory agencies as well. And that's definitely a risk for the universities. We saw something similar to this, last year when the president and kind of various agencies kind of went after DEI policies and immigration enforcement and used kind of similar use grant funding as kind of a mechanism to get things done. And a lot of schools, some schools filed lawsuits, but a lot of schools did kind of cede and said, we don't want to take this risk. We're just going to do what the president wants us to do and kind of reassess later. And, that ended up being, in some cases, pretty effective. But there's a big difference here that didn't exist in the other ones, and that's that, we're impacting another class of people here, which is to say the athletes. And the athletes are going to have standing to challenge this executive order. It's not just the universities that are going to be impacted by this, it's also the athletes themselves, and they're going to be able to file an action against us and say, hey, by punishing the universities, even if you're not directly trying to make what we're doing illegal, you are essentially making what we do illegal, and that goes against antitrust law.
So if I'm an AD and I'm talking to my basketball coach right now, and half of eligible Division I men's basketball players seem to be in the portal right now, am I instructing my AD as the AD, am I instructing my basketball coach to make sure that any transfers I'm bringing in are transferring for the first time?
I think it's one of those things where you kind of have to wait and see. Like, I don't know if anyone wants to necessarily be the first one to test this, but at the same time, it's difficult to kind of say like what the effect is going to be. And maybe it's a situation where the ADs are telling their coaches that, and a player is told that, and the player files a lawsuit and gets his overturned, and it's all done. But yeah, I can definitely see from the AD's perspective. I can definitely see from the school's perspective that they want to take this a little, at least try to mitigate the risk as much as possible. It's just, we'll see how long that actually lasts.
So now look at it from the student athlete perspective. So you got a basketball player who's transferring for a second time, and he's talking to a school and says, hey, I'd love to come here. And they said, yeah, we'd love to have you, but sorry, you've transferred once already. This would be a second transfer, and you haven't graduated. So according to this executive order, you haven't, you're not granted that right. Who is the student athlete filing a lawsuit against in that instance?
It would be the president and probably the NCAA as well, where the NCAA is being considered, if they're the ones, and I think a lot of this is going to depend on them as to whether they actually do anything kind of that advances this executive order. Because the executive order itself doesn't do anything to ban, multi-time transfers. It just directs the NCAA. It kind of gives support to the NCAA if and when they do that. I mean, it does say shall, but the president can't direct the NCAA to do anything, and the NCAA can file a lawsuit if the president threatened them with not complying with the executive order. But I think we'll see what happens. And I think pretty much instantly, if the NCAA does take any action on this and does create rules that do try to limit multi-time transfers, that's immediately when we see litigation. I don't think we need to even wait for a school to say, sorry, we can't take you. You're going to have to file a lawsuit.
So I want to go back to you two as former college administrators, athletics administrators. When you look at this executive order at large, take away any of the legal component that this may not be enforceable and none of it may come to fruition. But if you take it at face value, what do you like about it? What do you dislike about it from both a college athletics administrator and a college student athlete?
Interesting question. It's hard for me to kind of bifurcate the intent of it and the kind of details of it from the legality of it, because there is, even as others have pointed out very immediately after it came out, there is a giant caveat in a lot of the language about to the extent allowable by law or court orders. And if you read that and you understand what has been going on in the country around college athletics, not a whole lot of it really applies, if that's true. Like, not a whole lot of the major changes, right? The major changes that it purports to bring forward don't comply with either what has become law recently or at least a court order recently. And so it's hard to see it as too drastic. I I think that the biggest thing you walk away from is all sides know kind of the direction that's being given from at least that branch of government. And that branch of government is not acting completely independently. They're hearing a lot of sides to be able to bring that forward. And so it's from a very place of great authority is bringing forward a lot of the voices that, maybe have gotten caught in the noise, and now it's coming above the noise because of where it's coming from and who's bringing it forward. And you can kind of start to say, okay, these are the things we're going to really be talking through and challenging and trying to figure out amongst ourselves, because this is apparently the biggest, sticking points. And so I don't know, are there any that I think, oh man, that's good or that's really bad? I have a hard time even getting that too far into the weeds because of the caveats afforded to the document. But I mean, it's very clear at this point where, the people that the executive branch is listening to, where they want to see this go and what they would like to get out of any sort of congressional action. So now we have a very clear picture of, what the different conversations need to be. And I think if I'm a student athlete, I'm trying to figure out what's important to me, what's important to my peers. We'll get into this a little bit later, but I believe very strongly, I'll talk a lot more about leadership as we get into the unilateral decision today, but I believe very strongly that leadership is doing what's in the best interest of the institution and the organization that you're a part of, and not just for yourself. And it's going to require a lot of that moving forward. And that's at every level of this conversation. It's the athletic directors, the presidents, the coaches, the athletes, and the people who represent and want to help all of those groups move forward, is that you've got to look at it at a global scale. And it's going to take some real leadership to make sure that that's what people are being held accountable for, is thinking about somebody other than themselves.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I talk a lot about wanting to get everybody in the room and address, each of the issues. And this probably gives a little bit of a starting point. There's been other things out there that you could argue were a starting point as well. But we talked about it a lot. It's going to be congressional action or it's going to be collective bargaining. Sam can correct me if there's any other options, but those seem to be the two. And, this is kind of a starting point, no matter which direction, things go, to get some finality and some clarity and stability. My fear is that with some of the questions I've got, already, that this, while intended to provide some clarity and stability, it's muddying things again. So
one of the things that's mentioned that really caught my eye is the concept of escalating athletic department debt. And I feel like if you're a fan, you're a casual fan, you see all these schools investing in new facilities, multi-million-dollar locker rooms, better competition facilities. It seems like things are going really well and people are making money. And we've talked off camera, this concept of you've got schools that are broke, you've got schools that are putting it on a credit card, hoping to make money eventually, and then you've got schools with money. So how big of a national problem is this escalating debt, and how and when will that come to a head?
I think it's indicative more of a higher education problem. I think that there are a lot of schools that have opted to invest in these areas as a way to try to combat, if you, if you read anything about higher ed, you've got the enrollment cliff. Everybody's seen this coming. Everybody who is well entrenched in higher education has seen this coming for a decade plus, that birth rates were dropping off and the interest in going to college and the perceived benefit of going to college were waning at the same time. And so you have this enrollment cliff that there are going to be the same number of universities theoretically competing for fewer students. And so as higher education has changed is with regard to administrative costs and all the other things that go into it, all the things that are required of schools. And that's not to say anything about the schools being wasteful. It's all of the things that are required of universities through, in order for them to receive federal funding, in order for them to, bring forth the opportunities that everybody expects and the safeguards that everybody expects from a university. It is expensive. It's expensive to operate and administer. And with fewer students coming, you only have a few choices. You raise tuition or you compete for those students to show up so that you have more of them on campus and there are fewer in the pool. theoretically moving forward. You see a lot of different schools taking a lot of different actions, but some actions that some schools are taking are regarding athletics as their marketing and front door, if you will. So I think that it's indicative of a bigger problem, and short of, us as a country coming together and determining how we want to support higher education in this country, because you could make a great argument that post-secondary education in America is one of America's greater exports, even with the number of international students who come here to receive post-secondary education and what that provides to the world as the United States being kind of a global power in that way. How much is that important to the country for us to have post-secondary education? And certainly a lot of reasons to have people able to go through, vocational schools and trade schools and everything other than your traditional four-year university. Lots of reasons for all of it, but how important is the four-year university system? And if it's important, it's facing a crisis. And some schools are choosing to invest in athletics as a way to try to dig their way out of that crisis or avoid the crisis impacting them the most. And so I think there's a lot more to it. I think that's a very layered and nuanced question that you brought up. And so the idea of athletics debt as a national point of interest, I do think there is a national point of interest because of the reasons why some schools are going into debt to chase athletics glory. And I think that could be addressed regardless of a college athletics, congressional action or bill. I think there's got to be some real decisions made about what higher education should be in this country and what we want it to be. Because of the challenges it's facing. So it's interesting that it was brought up. It's interesting that it was put in there, because I do think that it leads to some really needed conversations around higher education, period. And if people can peel back those layers on why is that spending looking that way? Why does that athletics debt look that way? And ask the university presidents who have approved it, because it's not athletic directors going rogue. It's generally state boards of education. It's presidents, it's governors in some cases. And so from a debt standpoint, obviously there's private giving that can help you put up facilities and things like that. But from a debt financing standpoint, those are some decisions that are being made above the athletic director's head, and there's reasons for that. And so getting to the crux of that, I think, is an important thing. And I think if that comes out of this executive order, that would be a win.
Another thing, Joe, I think you've got a unique perspective on this that was mentioned in the executive order is revenue sharing, NIL, all permitted, but must not reduce scholarships or opportunities for women's athletics or Olympic sports. Now, even prior to the NIL world, you've been a part of college athletic departments that had to reduce teams and scholarship counts. What are those decisions that go into cutting a sport, which you're seeing all across the nation? I mean, the number of track scholarship opportunities is going down. All these Olympic sports are losing scholarships everywhere in the country. Why is that? And then, can you coexist with big NIL money and non-revenue sports?
Well, I think that question is actually very similar to one that Walsh was just talking about. And he kind of came at it from a higher ed perspective. I'll kind of talk about this through the lens of a department. Look, I don't know the specific numbers, but most college athletic departments are not, generating millions and millions and millions of dollars above what they're spending. Right. And so, you have all of these departments operating pre-NIL, some are making money, some are in a deficit, some are just breaking even. But then all of a sudden you add this new line item of rev share, and you're going to have to make some decisions. And nobody wants to go backwards with the infrastructure that they've built out. I mean, it's helping us succeed. And if we're not succeeding, we probably need more, and we got to add bodies, and we got to focus on these areas. What this new line item is going to force people to do is make a decision. Like what can you do without? What is important to you and you can't do without? And I think those are probably some of the conversations we're going to have in the future, because this executive order, it's do not cut sports, do not take away Olympic opportunities, do not take opportunities away from female student athletes. So if you can't do that and you've got this new expense, where are you cutting from? That's going to be the decision that departments are making moving forward.
Fraudulent NIL is another thing that was mentioned, which I had to laugh at, because fraudulent NIL schemes have been happening long before NIL was even an acronym. So we've given $1,000 handshakes in the SEC for years, allegedly. And from your perspective, Sam, how legally could anyone limit a market value of these student athletes? We've talked about it before, but who and how is market value determined?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because right now the way that they want to do it is through the College Sports Commission and through an algorithm that they set up in conjunction with Deloitte. And I think there are a lot of questions as to the legality of that in the first place. Again, from an antitrust perspective, and I know I keep repeating the word antitrust, but that's kind of, the biggest word in college sports law right now. Just having this third party kind of set a market and say you're not able to exceed this. The Supreme Court's been very clear that maximum price fixing is still price fixing, even if you're setting a level and kind of doing it from the perspective of, hey, we're actually helping you out by having you not overpay. The right to overpay is something that is protected under antitrust law, according to the Supreme Court. So again, from that perspective, it's like the executive order, and especially given what Mike brought up with the clause that said it only applies as far as it goes in terms of whether it's legal under just generally legal or legal under another court order. But I see a lot of issues of how that's even remotely enforceable and how it's something where the president would be able to, and it's not even the president who would be doing anything about it. It'd be the NCAA and the College Sports Commission, and it doesn't really change necessarily calculus because they're already kind of doing that. And the president can't really do anything to make it more legal than it is right now, which is to say a little bit tentative.
Mike, I'm going to turn it to you. Before we get to our unilateral decision, you've been on the discussion end from just about every side of NIL negotiations on behalf of the student athletes, on behalf of the sponsors, worked with donors. How collectively are current decisions being made on valuation of these student athletes, and how much does it really vary across the board?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I have not been in an athletic department since the advent of rev share from a true standpoint. I was not in an athletic department when the House settlement came through. So I have not necessarily been on their side. I do consult with a lot of them. I speak with a lot of them. I work with a lot of them. There's not a lot of, collaboration when it comes to the values. The truth of the matter is that most decisions of an athlete's value is determined by what it will take to get them on the roster. And then the consideration completely after the fact is whether or not there's a way to actually monetize that and if it's worth it. But for the most part, the schools are making a decision about whether or not it is worth getting that particular athlete to be on their roster in that particular sport for that upcoming season or perhaps multiple seasons. And that's really it. There's really not a whole lot of other thought about, well, if they're asking for this much, how do we justify paying them more? There's not a lot of discussion going around about that. There are some schools that are doing that. There are some universities who have systems set up to where, a coach or a support staff member is authorized to go forward with a certain offer. And then there's a conversation that goes back and forth about whether or not, okay, well, they came back with this number. Are they worth it? You have a discussion internally. There's actually a group set up. There are some schools that have that operation set up, but by and large, the conversations are around how much money can we have? Not how much is in the bank. How much can we have? How much can we swipe the card for? And then it's like, well, go build the roster you need to build. And that, it does lead to overspending, but I think Sam's point was really, really well articulated about antitrust doesn't care. It gives you the right to overspend. And that's what we're looking at right now. And no one's asking to not overspend, who ultimately has control. If they really cared about not overspending, they just wouldn't overspend.
Very sage point that I think we got a lot of overspending that is going to become future people's problems, not the existing people that are overspending. So, Joe, you touched on this a little bit earlier in your question to Sam, but we'll jump to our unilateral decision of the day. If you are an athletic director in today's landscape, how much of this executive order are you instructing coaches and staff to abide by, and why?
Well, Sam said it. Nobody wants to be first, right? If I'm an athletic director and I'm still carrying my general, operational techniques of if I'm presented with something, I go worst case scenario and I work backwards. And worst case scenario is that you are first and you are not abiding by this executive order. And yes, the Department of Education comes after you for grants, and now the academic side of campus is being negatively impacted because of decisions being made by the athletic department. And that would scare me if I was an athletic director. So if I'm an AD, I'm sitting down with my university president, discussing level of risk tolerance, and I'm making sure, our legislative affairs folks are in that room, that our general counsel is in that room, and we're having conversations about each bullet point in that executive order, and talking to people like Sam Ehrlich and what is likely going to be still standing in August and what is likely already going to be shot down by August 1. But we got to be able to plan, and there's a lot of ramifications from what's in that document. And I know people are saying it carries no weight, but it does have teeth. And I wouldn't be operating independently. I can tell you that much.
Sam, you get DMs from athletic directors all the time. So if I'm one of the 25 athletic directors in your inbox right now asking you what I do on this, what's your recommendation?
Well, first of all, I'd tell them exactly what Joe says, which is go talk to your general counsel, because they're going to have a better lay of the landscape than I'm going to have in terms of what your risk tolerance is and all that. But honestly, I think my biggest takeaway here, and my biggest kind of piece of advice here, and for whatever weight it carries, would be wait and see what the NCAA does. Because at the end of the day, this executive order does not say that certain things are going to happen. It does not say that certain things are, allegedly legal or purportedly legal. It says the NCAA shall create these rules. The NCAA shall do these rules, and then the agencies will kind of act on their behalf to enforce these rules. And if the NCAA doesn't do anything, if they treat this as, kind of a nothing burger, and they kind of go about their business because they understand that regardless of whatever they do, it puts them into legal hot water, then I don't think the athletic department should necessarily have to do anything either. If the NCAA comes out tomorrow with a new rule that says, well, based on this executive order, we feel that we can now legally enforce a one-time transfer rule, so we're going to put that on the books, that's a different story. And that's when things kind of explode, and maybe that lasts for 2 days, maybe that gets enjoined immediately. But yeah, no, that's something where the risk tolerance becomes a real kind of conversation piece. But if the NCAA is not putting that rule into the books yet, if they don't feel that they can legally defend that, if they don't feel like they feel like their risk tolerance is not high enough where they're going to rely on this executive order, which personally I think is smart, but we'll see what they do. And I think athletic departments should and will follow that.
Mike, bring us home.
Yeah, very similar to what both of them said. I think it actually is. My answer is parts of both of those. I think that this moment I mentioned earlier, this moment calls for true leadership, because I mentioned it before. I don't think that this executive order, carries a ton of weight, but I do think that that's global, and at an institutional level, it can create a ton of chaos if you're not careful. And I would identify, if I'm an athletic director, if I'm in the chair, I would identify that this is something that can cause consternation, chaos, and questions for the people that I'm responsible for. And so I take the responsibility to go have the conversations that Joe mentioned. You walk into that room and you figure out, what is our university's stance? What are we going to be held accountable for? What's our risk tolerance? Hopefully those groups of people, the president, general counsel, government affairs, everyone is able to then by proxy get the same answer from state attorney general, potentially the governor's office, and really figure out, where are we at on this? What's the decision? And it very could be that the answer is what Sam said. And if I'm walking into the room, I'm not just walking into the room with questions. I want to be able to be a part of the conversation on behalf of the people that I'm responsible for. And for me, that is what Sam said is what I would take forward is, what is the NCAA going to do? If we're comfortable as an institution waiting for the NCAA to make a decision, then I know that's the direction. And then I walk out and I cascade that to the rest of my staff, which I'm responsible for. And I just think that leading with conviction and gaining that conviction by having the understanding of what the rest of campus is interested in and what their risk tolerance is, and the state to a certain degree, leading with conviction, earning buy-in, and holding people accountable is what's required in this moment. And you do that by going and having the conversation and then coming forward, cascading that information and acting in a way that is putting everybody else at ease and providing the clarity. This is not time for leadership by committee. It's not time for kumbaya. It's time for, this is the direction. Everybody's looking for an answer. Everybody in the athletic department is looking for somewhere for an answer. And if you don't give them one place to get it with unwavering direction, they're going to find the answer that they're looking for rather than the answer that's being given to them. And right now, because of what Joe mentioned, this could impact campus. It could impact the academic programs. It can impact a lot of things outside of the walls of the athletic department, let alone the walls of one individual sport program. And so you have to be that person. That's what's being asked of you right now, is to make sure that you are setting the direction and holding people accountable. Because if you leave it up to everybody else's own devices, you run the risk of them making a decision that is in their best interest and not the best interest of the institution, which is your responsibility to find out on behalf of the athletic department.
Love it. Man, we talk about every week there's something happening, and in between the last show we had an executive order, so who knows what the heck we're going to talk about next week, but never-ending opportunities to talk about college athletics, and that does it for this episode of Unilateral Decisions. We'll see you next time.